Chapter 5. The Final Preparations. 9 days. Isaiah woke to darkness and the sound of rain drumming against the roof of his small room behind the kitchen. For a moment, he lay still on the narrow cot, listening to the steady rhythm of water against wood and remembering a time before he understood what it meant to count days, like a miser counts coins. Before he knew that time could be both endless and desperately short. 9 days until the Bellmonts left for Charleston. 9 days until everything changed. He rose and dressed in the dark, pulling on the slightly better clothes that had come with his new position. Not the coarse Osnaburg of the field hands, but still the clothing of property. The irony wasn't lost on him. Colonel Bellmont had elevated him to make use of his literacy, never suspecting that those same stolen skills would be his pathway to freedom. The kitchen was already warm when he entered, Abigail and 2 other women working by lamplight to prepare the family's breakfast. Abigail's eyes met his for the briefest moment. A question, an acknowledgement, a reminder that they were bound together in this desperate gamble. Then she turned back to her work, and Isaiah moved through to the main house. The colonel's study smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. Isaiah lit the lamp on the desk and settled into the chair that still felt foreign beneath him. The account books lay open where he'd left them the previous evening, neat columns of figures that represented human beings reduced to monetary value. Moses, blacksmith, age 41, valued at $1,600. Hannah, house servant, age 26, valued at $200. Samuel, field hand, age 16, valued at $1,000. His own name was there too, recently amended with a note about his new duties. The value beside it had increased. Literacy made him worth more, even as it gave him the tools to escape. Isaiah forced himself to focus on the task at hand. The Bellmonts' departure required extensive preparation. Accounts to be settled, instructions to be written for Silas Crow, correspondence to be drafted. The colonel had been pleased with Isaiah's work, praising his careful hand and quick understanding. Mrs. B. Bellmont remained suspicious, but her husband's satisfaction provided a thin shield. For now. The rain continued as morning broke, a gray dawn that matched Isaiah's mood. Through the study window, he could see the quarters, barely visible through the downpour. Somewhere in those cramped cabins, 6 other people were waking to count the same days, to feel the same mixture of hope and terror. 7, if he counted Ruth, though the child was too young to understand what was coming. 8 lives depending on his planning. 8 lives that could end as brutally as Thomas's had. The memory of Thomas's screams still haunted Isaiah's sleep. The young man was gone now, sold south to Mississippi, but his fate served as a constant reminder. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, one person who talked when they should have stayed silent. That's all it would take. Isaiah. He turned to find Colonel Bellmont in the doorway, already dressed despite the early hour. The older man's face showed the strain of impending travel, the social obligations of Charleston, the political tensions that even Isaiah had gleaned from overheard conversations. The nation was fracturing, though men like Bellmont refused to see the cracks in their world. Yes, sir? I need you to draft a letter to my factor in Charleston. Tell him we'll arrive on the 28th and will require our usual accommodations. The colonel moved to the window, gazing out at the rain-soaked grounds. This weather is the devil's own timing. I wanted the last of the cotton in before we left. Most of it's picked, sir. Just the far field left. Yes, well, Bellmont turned back to him. Crow will have to manage it, along with everything else. He paused, studying Isaiah with an expression that made the younger man's stomach tighten. You've done good work this week. Better than I expected, truth be told. Thank you, sir. Makes me wonder why I didn't think to use your talents sooner. The colonel's eyes narrowed slightly. Where did you learn to read, Isaiah? I don't recall authorizing any education in the quarters. The question hung in the air like the sword of Damocles. Isaiah had prepared for this, rehearsed the lie until it felt smooth as river stones. My mother, sir. Before she passed, she'd been taught by her previous mistress up in Virginia, before she was sold south. She taught me in secret when I was small. It was close enough to the truth to be believable. His mother had taught him his letters before she died when he was 8. But it was old Jacob who had continued the lessons in hidden moments, risking punishment to give a child the gift of words. Bellmont nodded slowly. I see. Well, no matter now. You're putting it to good use. He moved toward the door, then paused. My wife remains convinced that the house servants know more about Thomas's escape than they're letting on. I trust you've heard nothing that might confirm her suspicions. The trap was so obvious, it was almost insulting. Isaiah kept his expression neutral, his voice carefully respectful. No, sir. I've been working here in the study most days, and field hands and house servants don't mix much, as you know. Indeed. Bellmont studied him a moment longer, then nodded. Finish that letter and bring it to me before breakfast. We'll be leaving in 9 days, and there's still much to arrange. 9 days. When the colonel left, Isaiah sat motionless for a long moment, his heart hammering against his ribs. The question about his literacy hadn't been casual curiosity. Bellmont was probing, testing. And if the colonel was asking questions, it meant Mrs. War. Bellmont's suspicions were spreading like poison through the household. They needed to be more careful. They needed to be perfect. He forced his hands to steady and reached for paper and ink. The letter to the factor in Charleston was straightforward enough. Dates, accommodations, financial arrangements. But as he wrote, Isaiah's mind was calculating distances and timing. 9 days until the Bellmonts left. They would wait 1 more day after that, giving Crow time to settle into his temporary authority and relax his vigilance slightly. 10 days total. 240 hours. Every one of them had to count. The morning crept forward. Isaiah worked through the account books, drafted correspondence, organized documents for Crow's reference. The rain continued, turning the world beyond the windows into a gray blur. It would make the roads to Charleston muddy, possibly delay the Bellmonts' departure. That thought sent a spike of anxiety through his chest. Any change to the timeline meant adjusting their plans, recalculating, risking exposure. Near midday, Hannah entered the study carrying a tea tray. Mrs. Bellmont followed 2 steps behind, her presence as deliberate as a chess move. Isaiah kept his eyes on his work, acknowledging Hannah only with the briefest nod appropriate to their respective positions. Set it there, Mrs. Bellmont instructed, gesturing to a side table. And straighten those curtains before you go. They're hanging crooked. Yes, ma'am. Hannah moved with practiced grace, her movements economical and precise. As she adjusted the curtains, her back to Mrs. Bellmont, her eyes met Isaiah's for a fraction of a second. In that brief glance, he saw everything. Fear, determination, love, and a question. Are we still going? He gave the smallest nod, barely a movement at all. Yes. Mrs. Bellmont's sharp voice cut through the moment. Hannah, I asked you a question. Are you feeling unwell? You seem distracted lately. No, ma'am. I'm fine, ma'am. Because if you're coming down with something, I need to know now. We can't have illness spreading through the house right before our departure. I'm well, ma'am. Just tired from the extra work preparing for your trip. Mrs. Bellmont's eyes narrowed. She moved closer to Hannah, studying her with the intensity of a naturalist examining a specimen. You're not with child, are you? That would be most inconvenient timing. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and invasive. Isaiah's hands tightened on his pen, but he kept his expression blank, his attention apparently focused on the ledger before him. No, ma'am, Hannah said quietly. I'm not. Good. See that you remain focused on your duties. Mrs. Bellmont turned to leave, then paused at the door. Isaiah, my husband tells me you're doing excellent work. I suppose we'll see if you can be trusted to maintain these standards. Yes, ma'am. When they were gone, Isaiah released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. The tea sat cooling on the side table, untouched. He stared at the account books, the numbers swimming before his eyes, and forced himself to focus. 9 days. They just had to survive 9 more days of scrutiny, suspicion, and the constant weight of pretending to be less than human. That evening, after the day's work was done and the big house had settled into its nightly routines, Isaiah found a moment to slip out to the well behind the kitchen. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and heavy with moisture. Moses was there, ostensibly checking something on the well's mechanism, but his presence was too deliberate to be coincidence. Problems? Moses asked quietly, his hands busy with a wrench that didn't need to be there. Mrs. Bellmont is watching Hannah like a hawk, questioned her today about being pregnant. Implied she's hiding something. Hannah holding up? For now, but it's getting harder. Every day, the pressure increases. Isaiah drew a bucket of water, buying them a few more moments. Any word from the others? Samuel's barely keeping it together. Elijah's worried about him. Mercy says her joints are aching something fierce with this rain. She's concerned about traveling in bad weather. The rain might be a blessing, makes tracking harder. Isaiah set the bucket down, lowered his voice even further. We need one more meeting. Tomorrow night if possible. Everyone needs to know the final details. What to bring, what to leave, exactly where and when to gather. Moses nodded slowly. The corn crib again? Too risky. Crow's been patrolling more at night since Thomas. The old chapel in the woods, past the north field. You know it? The one that's half fallen down, that's near 2 miles. Which is why Crow won't think to check it. Tomorrow night, 2 hours after midnight. Can you get word to everyone? Samuel and Elijah. Yes, Mercy too. Abigail's harder. She's been kept close to the big house lately. I'll find a way to tell her. Isaiah picked up the water bucket. And Moses? Tell Samuel this is the last meeting before we go. After tomorrow night, we maintain complete silence until the night of the escape. No more gatherings, no more conversations. We can't risk it. He won't like that. He doesn't have to like it. He just has to do it. Isaiah met Moses' eyes. 9 days, brother. We've waited 2 years. We can wait 9 more days. And if something changes, if the Bellmonts delay their trip, then we adjust. But we don't panic and we don't run early. That's what killed Thomas's chance. Moses was quiet for a moment, his massive hands still on the wrench. You ever wonder if we're fools for trying? If maybe the smart thing would be to just survive? Every day, Isaiah admitted. But then I remember my sister's face when they put her in the wagon headed for Alabama. Remember my brother being dragged away to Georgia. Remember every time I've had to bow and scrape and pretend to be grateful for the privilege of being owned. He paused. And I know that surviving isn't the same as living. Moses nodded slowly. Tomorrow night, then. The chapel. 2 hours after midnight. They parted ways, Moses heading back to the forge area, Isaiah carrying the water bucket toward his room. As he walked, he noticed a figure in the shadows near the kitchen, Abigail, standing in the doorway, her daughter Ruth asleep against her shoulder. She met his eyes, and he gave a subtle nod. Tomorrow night, the chapel. She nodded back, understanding without words, and disappeared inside. In his small room, Isaiah lit a candle and pulled out a scrap of paper he'd hidden beneath the loose board under his cot. On it, written in his careful hand, were the names and descriptions of every Underground Railroad contact he'd memorized over the past 2 years. The Quaker family in Virginia who hid runaways in their barn. The free black woman in Maryland who ran a safe house disguised as a boarding house for travelers. The white abolitionist in Pennsylvania who had a hidden room in his cellar. Each name, each location, committed to memory until he could recite them in his sleep. He studied the list one more time, then held the paper to the candle flame and watched it burn. The names were in his head now, where no one could take them, where they couldn't be found if he was searched, where they would guide them to freedom or die with him trying. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Isaiah worked in the study, maintaining the careful facade of the obedient clerk. Colonel Bellmont came and went, discussing final arrangements for the Charleston trip. Mrs. Bellmont swept through periodically, her suspicious gaze lingering on Isaiah longer than necessary. In the afternoon, Isaiah was sent to deliver a message to Crow at the barn. The overseer was in a foul mood, the rain having delayed field work and put them behind schedule. Colonel says you're to have full authority while he's gone, Isaiah said, keeping his tone neutral. He's written out detailed instructions. Crow took the papers, his weathered face skeptical. And I'm supposed to trust you to relay his orders accurately? You're supposed to read them yourself, sir. That's why they're written down. For a moment, Isaiah thought he'd overstepped. Crow's eyes narrowed dangerously, and his hand moved toward the whip at his belt. Then the overseer laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Careful, boy. Being able to read doesn't make you smart, and being useful doesn't make you safe. He gestured dismissively. Get back to the house, and tell the colonel I'll keep things running smooth while he's gone. Nothing's going to happen on my watch. Isaiah walked back through the rain that had started again, Methley, Crow's words echoing in his mind. Nothing's going to happen on my watch. The overseer's confidence would be his downfall. He was so certain of his control, so convinced that the enslaved people under his authority were too cowed to attempt escape. He had no idea that 7 of them had been planning for 2 years. That night, Isaiah lay awake in his room, listening to the house settle into sleep. At midnight, he rose and dressed in dark clothing. The rain had stopped again, but clouds obscured the moon, making the night even darker, perfect for moving unseen. He slipped out of his room and made his way across the grounds, keeping to the shadows, moving with the careful silence he'd practiced for months. Past the quarters, past the tobacco barn, into the fields where the picked cotton stood in ghostly white rows. The chapel was exactly where he remembered, a small structure that had once served the plantation's enslaved community for Sunday services, until Colonel Bellmont had decided it was unnecessary. Now it was slowly returning to the earth, its roof partially collapsed, its walls leaning precariously. Inside, in the deeper darkness, 6 figures waited. Moses stood near what remained of the altar, his massive form solid and reassuring. Samuel and Elijah huddled together near the back wall, the boys' tension visible even in the darkness. Mercy sat on a fallen beam, her thin frame wrapped in a shawl despite the warm night. Abigail stood near the door, Ruth sleeping in her arms. The child had been given some of Mercy's sleeping tea to ensure her silence. And Hannah. Hannah stood near the center of the ruined chapel, her eyes finding his immediately in the darkness. "Everyone's here," Moses said quietly. "Let's make this quick. Longer we're gone, more risk someone notices." Isaiah moved to the center of the group, and they gathered close so he could speak in barely more than a whisper. 8 days from tonight, the Bellmonts leave for Charleston. We wait 1 more day after that. Let Crow settle in, get comfortable, think everything's normal. On the 9th night, we go. "Where do we meet?" Elijah asked, her young voice steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "The edge of the swamp, 2 miles north. You all know the path through the woods that the hunters use. We meet there 3 hours after full dark. That gives everyone time to slip away without being noticed all at once." "What do we bring?" Abigail shifted Ruth's weight in her arms. "Only what you can carry without slowing down. Food if you can manage it. Cornmeal, dried meat, anything that won't spoil. A blanket or coat, nothing else. No valuables, no keepsakes, nothing that will weigh you down or that you'd mourn losing if we have to drop it and run." Mercy spoke up, her voice thin but determined. "I've prepared medicines for all of us. Herbs for infection, for pain, for keeping Ruth quiet when needed. I'll distribute them the day before we leave." "Good." Isaiah looked at each of them in turn. "Once we're in the swamp, we follow the creek north for 3 miles. That will confuse the dogs. Then we come out near the old Hutchinson place. You know it, Moses? The abandoned farm. Yes. From there, we travel only at night. Follow the North Star. During the day, we hide in whatever cover we can find. Woods, caves, abandoned buildings. No fires, no talking unless absolutely necessary. We move in complete silence." Samuel shifted restlessly. "And if we get separated?" "There's a safe house 30 miles north, just across the Virginia line. A Quaker family named Patterson. Their farm has a red barn with a white cross painted on the door. If we get separated, that's where we regroup. But we don't get separated. We stay together, we move together, we survive together. Or die together," Samuel said quietly. "We're not going to die," Hannah said firmly. "We're going to make it to Canada. All of us." Isaiah met her eyes across the darkness, drawing strength from her certainty even as fear gnawed at his gut. "Listen to me," he said, his voice urgent despite its low volume. "The next 8 days are the most dangerous. We cannot give Crow or the Bellmonts any reason to suspect. We work hard, we keep our heads down, we act exactly as we always have. No changes in behavior, no unusual conversations, no taking risks." "And after tomorrow night?" Elijah asked. "After tonight, we don't meet again until we run. We don't talk about the plan. We don't even acknowledge that we know each other beyond normal interactions. If something goes wrong, if the timing changes, Moses will find a way to pass word. Otherwise, we trust the plan and we stick to it." Mercy stood slowly, her joints creaking audibly. "I want you all to know something. I'm 67 years old. I've lived my whole life in chains. If I die trying to be free, that's a better death than dying here as property. So don't any of you worry about me slowing you down. I'll keep up, or I'll die trying." "Nobody's dying," Moses said firmly. "We've planned for 2 years. We know the route. We know the contacts. We know how to move without being seen. We're going to make it." "We have to believe that," Hannah added. "Because if we don't believe it, we're already caught." They stood in silence for a moment, 7 people bound together by shared desperation and hope. Then Isaiah spoke again. 8 days, that's all. 8 more days of pretending, of bowing and scraping, of being less than human. And then we take back our lives. He looked at each of them. "Go back now, one at a time, different paths, and remember, we are already free. We just have to walk far enough north to make it true." They dispersed slowly, slipping out of the ruined chapel one by one into the darkness. Hannah lingered until last, and for a brief moment, she and Isaiah stood alone in the shadows. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I. But you still think we can make it?" Isaiah pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers in the darkness. "I think we have to try, and I think that if anyone can make it, it's us. All of us together. Promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if something goes wrong, if we get separated or caught, that you'll keep going. Don't come back for me. Don't throw away your chance." "Hannah, promise me, Isaiah." He wanted to refuse, wanted to tell her that he'd never leave her behind. But he understood what she was asking. She was giving him permission to survive, even if it meant surviving without her. "Only if you promise me the same," he said finally. She nodded against his forehead. 8 days. 8 days. They parted, and Isaiah made his way back through the darkness to his small room behind the kitchen. As he lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, he allowed himself to imagine it one more time. The moment when they would cross into Canada, when they would finally be free, when he could take Hannah's hand without fear and walk as a man instead of property. 8 days, 192 hours, 11,520 minutes. Every single one of them a step closer to freedom, or to the same fate that had befallen Thomas. Either way, the waiting was almost over.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.